There's nothing like being trapped on a ferry with no cell signal for days to make you realize how little you actually know about the person sitting next to you. I mean, you think you do. You see them every day at work. You share the same Zoom calls, the same bad coffee, the same inside jokes, but then you get stuck on a tiny, creaky boat between nowhere and nowhere else, and suddenly, the surface cracks a bit. Or maybe it explodes. So yeah, I was on this remote island ferry. Not exactly my usual Monday commute, and definitely not your typical office setting. And the guy beside me, Jamie, the coworker I'd barely exchanged more than "hey" and "did you get the TPS report" with, became the entire world for a solid 3 days. No Wi-Fi, no cell signal, no distractions, just the endless gray ocean and the two of us tossed together like some weird experiment in human connection. Let me back up a bit. I work for this small environmental consulting firm. Our latest project had us surveying some protected marine areas around these tiny islands off the coast. The islands are so small, so out of the way, that the only way to get there is this ferry that runs just a couple times a week. Obviously, no cell service, no internet, and definitely no Starbucks. I was sent along with Jamie from accounting, which was already a surprise. He's the type of guy who's always impeccably dressed, a little too polished for field work, and I'll admit, I never really thought much about him. I mean, on paper, he's just the quiet guy who keeps the numbers straight and who doesn't want to talk shop when you're stuck knee-deep in kelp. But when our flight from the mainland got delayed, and we missed the evening ferry, we had no choice but to catch the next one the following morning. That's when things started to feel different. The ferry itself was one of those old rust-speckled vessels with a barely functioning snack bar and a handful of passengers scattered about. But the moment we set off, the sea got angry. Stormy winds, waves slapping the hull, and the ominous feeling that our trip was about to be anything but smooth. A couple of hours in, the captain announced that the storm was forcing us to slow down and reroute, which meant what should have been a 5-hour trip stretched into an uncertain multi-day ordeal. And then, just like that, our phones died. No signal, no way to call anyone. No way to check if the world outside was still spinning. At first, I tried to joke about it, but Jamie was oddly calm, scanning the horizon like he'd done this before. Turns out, he'd grown up on an island very much like the ones we were headed to, and this kind of storm was his childhood summer vacation. His stories started trickling out, quiet at first, but with each wave he got a little more comfortable talking. There was something about listening to Jamie talk about his island life. The way he described the smell of salt air, the endless nights of stars, the simple but tough rhythm of living somewhere so isolated, that made me want to lean in closer. The storm, the silence, and the lack of distraction forced us into this bubble where we stopped being just coworkers and started being two guys who shared a quiet space and, unexpectedly, a connection. By the time the ferry finally docked, I realized I barely remembered the last time I'd felt this seen by anyone, especially someone I barely knew. And just like that, the horizon wasn't just the edge of the world anymore. It was the beginning of something I didn't see coming. When the ferry finally pulled into the tiny dock on the island, the sky was still bruised purple from the storm, and the wind carried that sharp, briny smell that hit you in the chest. People shuffled off like zombies, tired and a little shell-shocked, but Jamie and I stayed by the railing for a moment, letting the boat rock beneath our feet. "I didn't realize you were from around here," I said, breaking the silence. It felt weird asking, like I was prying, but somehow it felt okay. Like the storm had thrown a kind of honesty between us. "Yeah," Jamie said, looking out at the dark outline of trees against the twilight sky. "Born and raised, left for college, and never really left the island behind in my head. It's complicated." I nodded, not pressing, but curious. I'd always thought of islands as these idyllic escapes, but from his tone, it sounded like there was something more tangled beneath all that. We grabbed our bags and stepped onto the weathered dock. The island was small, the kind of place where you could probably walk from one end to the other in an hour, but it felt huge compared to the cramped ferry. The wind was cooler here, and the few lights from scattered cottages flickered like fireflies. "So, you're actually going to be here for the survey?" Jamie asked, adjusting the strap on his backpack. "Yeah, looks like it. And you?" "Same. I'm helping with the logistics. Mostly paperwork, but on-site support too. We started walking toward the small village that served as the island's main hub. It was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses in on you after the hum of a city. Shops were closed, streets empty, but there was a warmth in the light spilling out of windows and the faint murmur of a radio. "I guess this is the real field work," I said, trying to lighten the mood. Jamie smiled, a slow, genuine thing that caught me off guard. "Yeah, no Zoom meeting can beat this." We reached a tiny guest house where our team was staying. The place was rustic, with creaky floors and a wood stove in the corner. There was no Wi-Fi, at least not yet, so the only connection to the outside world was the occasional satellite phone signal at the top of a hill. That night, after the team had settled in, I found myself sitting on the porch with Jamie. The sky was clear now, the stars spread out like a glittering map, and the only sounds were the distant slap of waves and the rustling of leaves. "Ever get tired of it?" I asked him, nodding toward the ocean. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Sometimes. It's beautiful, but it can feel like a cage. My family's still here. There's tradition and expectation, not exactly easy to break away from." I could understand that. Even in a city, the expectations can feel suffocating, but his felt different. Rooted, like the ocean he'd been talking about earlier. "What about you? What keeps you in the city?" he asked. I shrugged. "I guess I'm still looking for my place. Everything's always moving there, but sometimes I wonder if I'm just chasing something I can't catch." He looked at me, eyes reflecting the starlight. "Maybe you're not meant to catch it. Maybe it's meant to catch you." I laughed softly, but there was something in his voice that made me pause. The way he said it felt like a secret, or maybe a hope. Over the next couple of days, we settled into the rhythm of the survey. The team split up into groups, and Jamie and I often ended up paired together, which was fine by me. Without the distraction of phones or internet, conversations flowed easier than I expected. We talked about everything, from his favorite fishing spots to my terrible attempts at cooking, and somehow, the walls between us kept coming down. One afternoon, we were out on a small skiff checking water quality samples. The sun was warm, the ocean calm, and the silence between us was comfortable. Jamie pointed out a pod of dolphins in the distance, his face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen before. "Growing up here, you get used to nature being this force that's both beautiful and brutal," he said. "It teaches you to respect things you can't control." I watched him, feeling something stir, a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. For all his quiet demeanor, there was this strength in him, like he'd been molded by the sea and the storms, forged into someone steady and real. That night, back at the guest house, there was electricity in the air, like the calm before a storm. We sat close on the porch again, the fire from inside casting flickering shadows on our faces. The conversation slowed, the playful teasing fading into something softer. "I'm glad we got stuck on that ferry," I said quietly. Jamie turned to me, eyes searching. "Me too." And just like that, the space between us shrank until it was just a breath. But neither of us moved. Not yet, because sometimes the biggest storms aren't the ones outside. They're the ones inside you, where you're not sure what you want or what you're ready to risk. And at that moment, under the endless sky on a remote island, I realized I was ready to find out. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual, the kind of early that feels like a secret borrowed from the world before anyone else is awake. Jamie was already up, sitting on the porch with a mug of some suspicious-looking instant coffee. The sky was just beginning to brighten, soft pinks and blues bleeding over the horizon. "You're an early riser," I said, sliding onto the bench beside him. He shrugged, a small smile playing on his lips. Island habit. The tide waits for no one. We sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun inch up, painting the ocean in gold. It felt like the kind of moment you want to freeze and tuck away. After breakfast, the work resumed. We spent most of the day walking along rocky shores, gathering samples, taking notes, and trying not to slip on the slick stones. Jamie was surprisingly good at the fieldwork, for an accountant anyway. He had this easy confidence, like he belonged on the edge of the world. At one point, we found a quiet cove with crystal clear water and a scattering of wildflowers. Jamie kicked off his boots and waded in, grinning at the cold. "Come on," he said, beckoning. I hesitated, but the day was warm enough, and hell, maybe I needed to feel the water on my skin. I followed him in, the chill biting, but refreshing. We stood there for a long moment, just looking out at the horizon. "You know," he started, "I always thought I'd leave this place. Thought I needed to build a life somewhere bigger, faster." I glanced sideways. "But you didn't?" "No." He shook his head, eyes distant. "I realized maybe my life doesn't need to be loud or fast. Maybe there's something to be said for quiet." I nodded slowly. "I get that. Sometimes I think I'm running in circles, trying to find the next big thing." Jamie turned to me, serious now. "What if the next big thing isn't a thing at all? What if it's just this? People, moments." It was the kind of thing you hear 100 times, but coming from him, it landed differently. I found myself wanting to believe it. We pulled our boots back on and headed back to the guest house, the sun dipping low again. That night, the rest of the team was out at a local pub, but Jamie and I stayed behind, the quiet between us thick with things unspoken. "I've been meaning to ask," I said, "what made you join this project? Accounting to fieldwork is quite a leap." Jamie laughed softly. "I guess I wanted a change, something to shake up the routine. Plus, it's good to get out of the office and into the real world sometimes." "Yeah," I replied. "There's something about being unplugged that forces you to see things clearer." He nodded, eyes locked on mine. "I'm glad you were stuck on that ferry with me. Otherwise, I don't think I'd have had these conversations." "Me too." The night stretched on, words fading until it was just the soft sound of the wind. A few days later, the storm finally passed, and with it, the ferry that would take us back. The island felt different somehow, like it had imprinted itself on me. Jamie and I packed our bags, the bittersweet weight of impending goodbye settling in. On the dock, the same rusty ferry waited, its engines humming low. The rest of the team climbed aboard, eager to rejoin the world they'd left behind. Jamie lingered beside me, and for the first time, the space between us felt electric, full of possibilities. "Hey," I said, voice barely above a whisper, "when we get back, maybe we grab a coffee? Or something stronger?" He smiled, the kind that reaches your eyes, and said, "I'd like that." As the ferry pulled away, the island shrinking behind us, I realized that sometimes, getting lost is how you find what really matters. And maybe, just maybe, Jamie was going to be part of that. Back on the ferry, the hum of the engines felt less like a lifeline and more like a countdown. Every passing minute was edging us closer to the mainland, back to cell phones, emails, and the endless noise that had been muted for days. It was strange. After everything we'd shared, the comfortable silences, the stories under the stars, I wasn't ready to go back to that world, especially not without Jamie. We found seats near the railing, the cold metal a sharp contrast to the warmth lingering between us. Jamie was quiet, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes whenever they caught mine, like he was waiting for me to make the first move, or maybe just to say the obvious. So I did. "Do you think this, whatever this is," I waved my hand vaguely between us, "can survive back in the real world? With Wi-Fi and deadlines?" He chuckled, the sound low and genuine. "I don't know, but I think it's worth trying." The ferry cut through the waves, and for a moment, the world seemed to narrow down to just us, the endless ocean, and a fragile hope. When we docked, the crowd spilled onto the platform like a wave, pulling us back into the rush of life. We walked off together, bags slung over our shoulders, the noise of the city greeting us like a harsh slap after the island's quiet hug. Jamie looked around, a little overwhelmed. "It's a lot." I laughed. "Welcome back to civilization." We caught a cab to the office, the city's pulse quick and relentless outside the window. The next morning the office felt smaller, the walls closing in after the vastness of the island. But having Jamie there made it feel a little less suffocating. Over the next few days, we settled into a rhythm that felt both new and familiar. Lunch breaks turned into coffee runs, and our chats shifted from professional to personal, the line blurring until it felt natural. One afternoon, as we sat in the break room, Jamie looked up from his cup and said, "I've been thinking about what you said on the ferry." About trying. Trying what exactly? I asked. Us. This. Whatever you want to call it. He smiled, a little nervous. I felt my heart skip. I want to try, Jamie. I don't know where it'll go, but I want to find out. He reached across the table, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face. Me too. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind, quiet dates, stolen moments between meetings, the slow, steady building of something real. There were awkward moments too, when the newness of it all made me second guess. But Jamie was patient, steady, grounding. One evening, after a late work session, we found ourselves on the office rooftop, the city lights sprawling beneath us. Jamie pulled me close, and in the cool night air, with the buzz of the city all around, we kissed. Slow, tentative, and full of promise. I realized then that the island wasn't just a place on a map. It was a turning point. A place that forced me to look beyond the familiar and take a chance on something I never expected. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of the kind of story worth holding on to. After that night on the rooftop, things between Jamie and me started to feel different. Not in a dramatic, movie-like way, but more like a slow unfolding, like a story you didn't realize was happening until you looked back and realized all the little moments added up. The office became this strange hybrid of work and something else entirely. I caught myself looking for him during meetings, not because I needed to coordinate on the project, but because I liked seeing him there, quietly focused. And sometimes, when the day dragged on too long, one of us would suggest grabbing coffee, except it never stayed just coffee. It was the kind of small, stolen time that makes you hold your breath a little, hoping it stretches on. One afternoon, we were crunching numbers in a conference room, the fluorescent lights humming overhead. Jamie cracked a joke about the absurdity of spreadsheets, and I laughed louder than I wanted to, mostly because his smile caught me completely off guard. It was like sunlight breaking through a cloudy day. Seriously, man, you owe me a coffee after that one, I said, sliding my laptop closed. He raised an eyebrow, smirking. You're on. We headed down to the little cafe near the office, the one with the intimidatingly complicated espresso machine and the barista who seemed to hate his life. We found a corner table, the kind of spot where nobody bothers you, and just talked. No emails, no work. Just Jamie and me. So, he said, stirring his latte like it was some kind of puzzle. What made you take the chance? On the ferry, I mean. I thought about it. I guess I was tired of pretending I had it all figured out. The island was a reminder that sometimes you just have to let go, and being stuck with you. Well, it felt like a sign. He nodded slowly, then leaned forward. You know, I was scared. I'm not great at this, at opening up. You're doing fine, I told him. Thanks, he said, eyes soft. I want this to work, but it's new for me. Same here, I admitted. But I'm willing to see where it goes, no matter how messy. That night, walking back to the office, there was a quiet buzz between us, like the world had shifted just enough to let something new slip in. Over the next few weeks, we navigated this new territory. The awkwardness, the excitement, the fear of messing it up. Most days, it felt like we were figuring out a dance neither of us had learned before. I caught myself wanting to send him a quick message during the day, just to say, thinking about you, even though it was risky and messy. One Friday, after wrapping up a long week, Jamie invited me out for dinner. It was just a casual thing, but as we walked through the city streets, the glow of streetlights wrapped around us like a secret. At the restaurant, we talked about everything and nothing. His childhood on the island, my failed attempts at dating apps, our favorite movies. The easy rhythm of conversation made me forget, even for a moment, the buzz of office gossip and looming deadlines. After dinner, we found ourselves outside, the night air cool, but not cold. Jamie reached for my hand, and I didn't pull away. Instead, I squeezed his fingers, feeling the steady beat of his pulse against mine. "Do you ever think about what comes next?" I asked. "Voice almost too soft to hear. All the time," he said, "but I'm okay with taking it one day at a time." I smiled, the kind of smile that comes from somewhere deep inside. Me too. Days turned into weeks, and the line between work and life blurred deliciously. We became each other's confidants, the safe place to land when the world felt relentless. And somewhere in the middle of spreadsheets and sample reports, I realized I was falling for him in a way I never planned. But with every step forward, there was that tiny voice in the back of my head, the one reminding me that office romances are complicated, that feelings can get messy, and that sometimes the safest thing is to just pretend it's not happening. One afternoon, Jamie dropped by my desk with that familiar nervous smile, clutching 2 coffees. He sat down beside me, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. Finally, he cleared his throat. "I've been thinking, maybe we should tell someone. You know, the team." I blinked, caught off guard. "Tell them what?" "That we're together, or at least trying." I swallowed back the sudden wave of panic. The office wasn't exactly the friendliest place for something like this, and I wasn't sure I was ready to put labels on it in front of everyone. "Are you sure?" I asked. He nodded. "I think I want to stop hiding it. I want to be honest with myself, with you, and with everyone else." His courage made my heart ache. I wanted to be brave like that. But I also worried about the whispers, the awkward glances, the possible fallout. "Okay," I said finally, the word feeling heavier than I expected. "We'll do it together." Jamie smiled, relief washing over his face. Together. That evening, we sat side by side, scrolling through our emails and preparing a message to the team. It wasn't easy, but as I hit send, I felt lighter than I had in months. The days that followed were a roller coaster. Some people were supportive, others offered awkward congratulations. A few barely looked at us the same. But through it all, Jamie and I held on to each other, the anchor in the storm. And as we settled into this new chapter, messy and uncertain as it was, I knew one thing for sure. Getting stuck on that ferry wasn't just a twist of bad luck. It was the beginning of the most unexpected and most real connection I'd ever found. The weeks after coming out at the office were, well, a mixed bag. Some days felt like a breath of fresh air, like I'd shed a heavy coat I'd been carrying around for years. Other days, the weight of stares and sideways glances reminded me just how cautious you have to be when you're the new couple in a workplace that's still figuring out how to be okay with anything outside the norm. Jamie and I found a rhythm, though. We became each other's safe space in a place that wasn't always kind. I remember one afternoon, we were in the break room grabbing coffee, and one of the more conservative managers walked by and gave Jamie a nod that was surprisingly warm. It wasn't much, but it felt like a small victory. On the flip side, there were awkward moments, like the time someone accidentally CC'd the entire department on a snide email about office distractions. It was petty, sure, but it hit harder than I expected. I caught Jamie staring at his screen, jaw tight, and I could feel the tension radiating off him. Later that day, we met up on the rooftop again, our unofficial escape. The city stretched out beneath us, 1,000 lights flickering in the dusk. "Don't let them get to you," I said, trying to sound braver than I felt. "People will always have opinions. Doesn't mean they're right." Jamie sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I know. It's just, sometimes it feels like I'm back on that island, caught between wanting to leave and needing to stay." I reached out, took his hand. "Well, whatever happens, we stick together. No storms we can't weather." He smiled, that slow, real smile that made me feel like everything was going to be okay. Outside of work, things were changing too. Jamie and I started carving out time for each other beyond the office hours. Weekend hikes, lazy Sunday mornings with terrible takeout, and even that first awkward trip to meet each other's families. Meeting his parents was intimidating. They were warm but old school, and I wasn't sure if they fully understood what this meant for their son. But they welcomed me with open arms, which surprised me and made me grateful. My own family was a different story. I hadn't told them yet. I wasn't sure how to, and part of me was scared. Jamie was patient, never pushing, but always there when I needed to talk through the what-ifs. One evening, as we sat on my couch watching a mindless sitcom, Jamie nudged me gently. "You okay with maybe telling them soon?" I hesitated, the familiar knot in my stomach tightening. "I want to. It's just complicated." He reached over, squeezed my hand. "Whenever you're ready." His support made the idea feel less daunting. I realized that maybe I didn't have to have all the answers, just enough courage to take the first step. Work picked up again with new projects, and with it, the usual deadlines and stress. But Jamie and I had something that kept us steady, a quiet anchor in the chaos. There were days when I looked across the room and caught him watching me, eyes soft, full of something that made my chest tighten. One evening, after a long day, Jamie surprised me by showing up at my apartment with a bottle of wine and 2 takeout containers. "I figured we both needed a break," he said, grinning. We sat cross-legged on the floor, eating and talking about everything and nothing. The night felt easy, like a promise wrapped in laughter. Later, as the city lights twinkled outside my window, Jamie got serious. "Do you ever think about the future? Like, what we want?" I paused, considering. "Honestly, I'm still figuring that out, but I know I want you in it." His smile was slow and steady. "That's a good start." We stayed up late, making vague plans and dreaming quietly, wrapped in the kind of comfort that comes from knowing someone's got your back. But life isn't perfect, and I wasn't naive enough to think this was the end of the challenges. There were moments of doubt, questions about how to balance work and love, moments when past fears crept back in. One afternoon, Jamie and I had a rare argument. Nothing major, just the kind of fight that sneaks up when you're both exhausted and stressed. "I feel like sometimes you keep me at arm's length," he said, frustration clear in his voice. "Like you're scared of getting too close." I swallowed hard, the truth stinging. "Maybe I am. I've been hurt before. It's hard to let someone in." He softened, reaching for my hand. "I'm not going anywhere, but you have to let me in." That night, lying next to him, I realized that love wasn't just about the good times. It was about showing up during the hard ones, too. Over time, those moments brought us closer. We learned to communicate better, to be patient with each other's scars. And through it all, I kept thinking back to those days on the island. The storm, the silence, the unexpected connection. It felt like a lifetime ago, but also like the moment everything began. In the end, being stuck on that ferry with no signal wasn't just a story about getting lost. It was about finding someone worth holding on to, even when the world outside is loud and messy and unpredictable. And for now, that felt like enough. Months had passed since that rocky conversation, and somehow, things had settled into a rhythm that felt honest and steady. Jamie and I weren't perfect, far from it, but we were learning, inching closer to the kind of partnership I'd always imagined but never thought I'd find. One chilly evening, we found ourselves back on the office rooftop. The city sprawled beneath us, alive with lights and hums. But up here, it was quiet, our little sanctuary away from the noise. We sat side by side, shoulders barely touching, watching the stars blink awake. Jamie reached over, his fingers grazing mine, and this time, I didn't hesitate. "It's been a hell of a ride," I said, a small smile tugging at my lips. He chuckled softly. "Yeah, from being stuck on a ferry with no signal to this." I looked at him, really looked at him, the way the city light caught his eyes, the gentle curve of his smile. "I'm glad I got stuck, because it brought me to you." Jamie squeezed my hand. "Me too. I think sometimes life forces you off course just to find the right path." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of everything that had happened settling around us like a warm blanket. The fears, the doubts, the moments of uncertainty, they were all part of the story now, but so is the hope. "Do you think we're ready for what's next?" I asked quietly. He met my gaze, steady and sure. "I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want to face it with you." At that moment, it didn't matter what challenges or surprises lay ahead, because we had each other, and that was enough. As the night wrapped around us, I realized that sometimes the best things come when you least expect them, in the silence between signals, in the stillness after a storm, in the quiet moments shared with someone who sees you. And for me, that someone was Jamie. My coworker, my unexpected anchor, my home. We stood up together, hands linked, ready to step back into the world, not as coworkers or strangers, but as something more, something real. And that felt like the beginning of everything.